This is CyberSound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity.
Welcome to CyberSound. Joined as always by Steve Maresca, Michael Grandy.
Hey, hello.
Hey guys. So today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about succession planning, more specifically probably at the executive level, a little bit like your chief information security officers, maybe executive IT. But I think it's relevant. The topics we're going to cover generally are relevant for any sort of important employee within the company.
Yep.
But on that CISO side, they tend to be shorter duration positions. Very often we'll see shorter duration positions there. And certainly, Steve, with the work that you do on a sort of a day-to-day basis as the sort of strategic advisor for a lot of clients on the security side, you have conversations around, should you hire a CISO? Are you helping maybe to backfill the exit of a CISO? Or maybe you might be providing support for a CISO, but you regularly have these conversations around, well, what happens if this individual isn't here anymore? What do you do?
Right. I mean, we work with a lot of organizations that are, maybe they have a named CISO, but they're also fulfilling other departmental functions so that they're strapped and stretched thin. So we help them in a lot of different ways. What we're really talking about are CIOs, CISOs, directors of security, anyone that fits that general description because they're key employees.
And does it sort of cover sort of intentional and unintentional, I would think, in similar ways, right? Because burnout's probably
100%
a leading issue in some cases, and planned succession on the other side of the spectrum, right?
Right, that's the luxury.
That's the luxury. Okay.
So some framing here. Over the last 2 to 4 years, 2022, 2020 through the present time, the tenure of a typical CISO, it depends on the industry, spans somewhere between 18 to 26 months. It's really short.
26, not 36. 18 to 26.
Yes.
Wow.
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 85% of CISOs surveyed in a variety of quarters indicate that they're looking for another role or would move to one if an opportunity arose.
Okay.
Gartner, just to reinforce that same statement, says in 2022 that somewhere in the neighborhood about half of those employees will shift to other roles by 2025.
Wow.
It's staggering. And we see that regularly. There are so many positions unfilled throughout pretty much every industry we work with. And burnout is very common. In the really highly regulated industries, it doesn't take long for something to occur that is adverse to the organization's existence, and sometimes that means someone shifting.
Well, and the CISO role is often a blame role, right? So that does add to the stress for sure.
It can be. And, even if that's not the case, attack frequency in some industries is very, very high.
Right.
Pure burnout on a psychological level, because you're just going at it day to day and never really truly getting ahead.
Right,
that wears people out quickly.
And I have to think in some industries, especially as you mentioned, highly regulated, additional burden of regulatory compliance, reporting requirements, attestations, things that sort of may not have been in the purview of the job description to start.
Right.
Over time, that changes.
Right now they are, for sure.
It's death by 1,000 cuts from that perspective. Yeah. And that kind of underscores why retaining talent is so critical, because once you develop competence in that area, as soon as they leave, you've intrinsically lost something central to the business or the organization. Yeah. So the backdrop is that departures of key staff can happen unexpectedly. Whether it's a personal crisis, a health issue, a termination, there's lots of reasons.
Yeah.
So plan around the unplanned. That's what we're really thinking from a preparatory perspective. Everything else is more organizational sustainment and making sure that people can be brought in to fill positions that are scheduled to terminate or retirements that are known multiple years in advance. That's more of the calm, measured angle to this.
So, and this may be sort of jumping around a little bit, but when we say sort of plan for the unexpected and ensure there's cross-training and cross-development, who's ultimately responsible for a lot of that work, or ultimately to be sort of guiding that decision making? It really is the rest of the C-suite and sort of executive leadership of the company?
It should
or
be.
Organization.
Yeah, this is something that is not well recognized through management boards, in my opinion.
Okay.
Usually the responsibility for finding replacement talent is pushed down several levels, and that's fine, but it does mean that there are difficulties at times in trying to self-determine what that might mean. So let's shift into what things can be done to help plan.
Yeah. Sure.
Bottom line is start early. Presume that someone will depart.
So can we pull it back even a little bit further? There's one way is easy. You're fortunate enough to have an employee say, "I'm going to retire in a year," or right, something like that. So now you have this collaborative opportunity to maybe hire a replacement. The other way we're thinking about this is, how does the organization protect itself against a potential departure? Knowing the data, right? If it's 18 to 26 months, you're likely not having a conversation with the CISO saying, "Hey, someday you're going to leave. I want to start planning for it." How do you see orgs go after that? Is it training maybe a more junior person to potentially take that position? What do you see that works?
Yeah, I mean, the most important way of planning is mentoring other employees. Looking inward for this type of role is frankly a second thought for most organizations.
Right.
They tend to look outward. However,
somebody who already has that experience, right?
Right. Yeah. But the cultural learning, the essential skills for someone like a CISO or a CIO tend to be inquired with internal relationships. They're evangelists, they're diplomats, they are translators across departments. You can be all of that as an external entity and coming in being effective from outside. But you then need to build all of the relationships.
Right.
You shorten the overall onboarding and integration by months and months, maybe a year.
If you have those
relationships already established. So training junior people who have expertise in a variety of key areas, organizational capabilities, basically they understand the technology, they understand the people, they understand the business mission, as well as more bolt and tackling around project management, administration, management.
And I would think from an organization's point of view, the better cross-training, the better understanding that's set forth initially that, hey, we've got a lot of capable folks participating and knowledgeable in this area. It probably makes the culture a little bit better. It probably makes it a better environment for someone to potentially stay longer. I mean, it's all sort of
there's opportunity.
Because there's opportunity, right? And so that feels like it would be an important factor.
It does, but also trying to separate the person from the role, which is a very challenging issue in a lot of places. You can encourage people to stay longer, but they need to know what the role that they're walking into requires and what it will mean when they inhabit it. A lot of the time, titles are people, right? So we have to stay away from the notion of the CISO is John.
Right.
Because that's not the job. The CISO is the role. And if you don't define it, then you can't know what to look for. You don't know what characteristics to support.
So that's one of the benefits of it, maybe even slightly different than succession planning. It's looking at the landscape, understanding, or maybe trying to recognize what's coming in the future, and either training internally to meet those demands, or you're potentially hiring for that. But there is an opportunity to say, we know there's a new regulatory requirement that's coming up. Let's make sure that whomever we hire has that sort of familiarity or capability.
This conversation, while focused on technology for sure and security, really feels as though it's applicable across all levels of an organization.
It certainly is.
Smart planning, understanding roles, understanding responsibilities, implementing good controls, planning for the unexpected. Really, it sounds like good lessons.
It does.
And it seems easy when you say it, while we're recording a podcast, but then as soon as you leave, you and I were just chatting, you need to run back because you're busy today, and you've got a whole variety of sort of pending problems to deal with. Those are the things that make it hard to plan.
Right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, for most people, that's kind of every day.
It's
hard to step back and plan
And that's true everywhere, right?
Everywhere.
The focus here is that we're talking about really high flux positions that
Right.
rotate within a single reporting cycle from an audit perspective or
Sure,
something like
sure,
that. That's
sure.
catastrophic.
Right.
So understanding where your high rotation turnover is, understanding the roles that have market dynamics that cause such things, that's where people should focus. Other things that you should do. You have to anticipate future requirements, as you said. That means technology, that means business, that means regulatory. Train multiple people as groups so that nothing is reliant on the one person running the interaction
Single
with.
point of failure.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't want your CISO being the sole person interacting with financial audit. That
Makes
happens
sense.
some places, which
Yeah.
sounds crazy
Sure.
for a financial audit, but sometimes it's the CISO, not the CFO.
Sure.
You got to bring in the board. You talked about that before. They have influence. They have connections. They have important say as it pertains to succession planning. They need to make sure that the plans that are established actually meet business requirements on a multi-year, 7-year cycle, and sometimes the only folks with that actual perspective are operating at that level.
Yeah.
So they need to be part of the conversation. And more broadly than that, I think it's extraordinarily important that, as we emphasize elsewhere, security is everyone's responsibility. And in this particular discussion, that is kind of the case for the CISO.
Sure.
The CISO shepherds. Everyone else should understand their role. And if that's the function, it should be easy to refill.
Makes sense.
I think as a takeaway, define a plan, define candidates for rising up, equip them to do so, mentor, and reward people with promotions and titles and all the things that entice them to stay and continue to build the organization. That's how you tolerate occasional absences.
Longevity as a positive,
Right.
not a negative.
Right.
Yeah.
We work with a lot of CISOs. They're busy. We're supporting them. We work with a lot of organizations that lack a CISO. So be comfortable bringing in outsiders, but understand that the same requirements for bringing them into the fold and teaching them the business is intrinsically required for all of this.
So maybe my last question would be, do you see organizations do planning, and I'll call it succession planning, but just planning and evaluating of staff, maybe on a quarterly basis? What frequency do you see it? And I'm sure there are drivers that make you maybe all of a sudden have something that's in the forefront that you feel urgent. But should you look at this quarterly?
This is probably an annual thing.
Annual. Okay.
Yeah, we're not talking about employee evaluations here at all.
Yeah.
Those are a feed-in to
I meant
succession
more
planning.
evaluating sort of the state of the organization and the risk.
No, candidly, most organizations don't do this at all. And that's the reason for talking about it.
Okay.
Right.
This is please think about it because it will hurt you at some point, or at the very least, it will be a point of friction.
And annual feels much more, agreeable from a schedule, especially from a board agenda perspective.
Right. And that's the pace
else.
of business change, generally speaking. So it works out that way.
Yeah, but annual, if the average lifespan is 18 months,
26
right?
months.
So quarterly does sound like often, for sure.
Sure.
Annual to me seems maybe not quite often enough. Right?
There are some that assert that you should start planning for a replacement 6 months after someone is hired. I think that's somewhat unreasonable.
Yeah, that's a little pessimistic.
Right.
I hope.
Welcome aboard. When you disembark.
Right.
By the way,
candidly, I think that's just maintaining all of the documentation,
Yeah.
sustaining the trajectory, rather than being too pessimistic about it.
so I think I'll wrap up, and I feel like we say this kind of regularly, which is this doesn't have to be a hugely complicated project. Just actually sit down and spend an hour of critical thought sometimes.
Yeah.
And that would likely be sufficient, and probably, to your point, more than a lot of organizations are doing today. Like, we have the business continuity discussions where people treat that as a huge endeavor and then do nothing. There's a middle ground, and it's okay.
And be okay being a little uncomfortable with the topic, right? Because it's a little disconcerting to think about departure, think about unplanned situations that can arise, but it's a necessity.
The simplest echo of all of this is writing up a job description of what your CISO does or should be doing.
Yeah.
or CIO, or any other executive tier person that needs to have this planning attached to it. Don't make them do their job description because that might be perceived a little poorly.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
Do it in a
Yeah.
structured way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, thanks for joining. I think this is a good topic. Anytime you can take a minute to plan, the organization is going to be better for it. It's hard to do, but I think good advice. So as always, we do hope that somebody heard this and got some real valuable takeaways.
Hit the like button.
Hit the like button. Every podcast I listen to now really does push. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you interact, make sure you leave a comment, and
share.
And I think we really do need to start asking people to do that more explicitly now, because it is how we grow, and that's our goal, right?
We got over 100 episodes. So
100. This might be 109.
That seems impossible.
100.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it 109? Do you know?
it's getting up there.
Yeah, right in there. Okay.
Getting there.
Well, so yeah, there's a lot of content if you start from the beginning.
Well,
if
that's what I was
you're a
gonna
new
say.
listener.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for listening. We always appreciate it. Thank you.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.